A mechanic saved little twin girls and their mom from a burning car. Next morning, helicopters filled his farm. The sky burned orange as the sun sank behind the hills. A lone black SUV sped along a quiet rural highway, weaving slightly, like it couldn't decide if it wanted to stay on the road. Isabel Hartford gripped the wheel tightly, her knuckles white. In the rearview mirror, she checked on the twin girls, Evelyn and Alara, curled up together in the back seat, fast asleep, their arms wrapped around a worn stuffed bear. The dashboard lights flickered. Isabel's jaw clenched. She tapped the brake pedal. Nothing. No resistance. The steering wheel began to shudder in her hands. A cold pit opened in her stomach. Not now. Come on, damn it. She tried again. The brakes were unresponsive. A warning light flashed red. Then, a hiss. Smoke began curling from beneath the hood. The acrid smell of burning oil and gasoline seeped into the cabin. God, no. A small burst of fire flicked out from under the hood. "Girls," Isabel shouted, reaching behind her as much as she could. "Wake up! Evelyn, Alara, get down, crawl to the back seat, low and fast." Now, the SUV jerked as she tried to swerve onto the shoulder, but it veered out of control, plowing through a roadside fence. The crash sent a shudder through the entire frame. The airbags exploded out of the steering column, slamming into Isabel's face. Her head snapped forward. She gasped, disoriented, blood trickling from her forehead. The girls screamed in terror. Outside, a trail of leaking fuel caught flame, snaking toward the wreckage. A few hundred yards away, in a weathered machine shed on a small farm, Jake Wyatt paused mid-repair on a tractor engine. The muffled boom made him lift his head. His ears, trained by years in combat zones, caught the signature pop of a controlled fire gone wrong. His eyes narrowed. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed a crowbar, a fire extinguisher, and ran for his pickup. The old truck roared to life as he sped down the dirt road toward the plume of smoke rising in the distance. He spotted the SUV before he stopped. Flames licking up the undercarriage. A woman inside pounding on the window. 2 kids crying behind her. Jake threw the truck into park and bolted. He slammed the crowbar against the driver's side window. "Can you open the door?" Inside, Isabel coughed, eyes wide with fear. She shook her head. The locks were jammed. Jake shouted, "Move the girls! Get them to the back!" The fire reached the front seats. Alara shrieked. Evelyn was coughing hard, her tiny hands over her mouth. Jake ran to the rear door. The heat was intense. 1 hit, nothing. He swung again, twice, 3 times. With a final blow, the latch gave and the door creaked open. He reached in, lifted both girls into his arms, and ran from the vehicle as it groaned under the growing pressure of the flames. He dropped to his knees on the grass, setting the girls down gently. Evelyn curled into a ball, wheezing. Alara clung to her bear, the fur now singed black. Jake turned back. Isabel was still inside, fighting the seatbelt twisted tight across her body. He charged in. The flames were in the front now, devouring the floor mat. Smoke stung his eyes. With one arm, he reached across Isabel, pulling a pocket knife from his belt. He slashed the seatbelt free and dragged her out. They hit the grass together, rolling once, just as the SUV exploded behind them. The 4 of them lay on the ground, breathing hard. The wreck burned fiercely nearby, sending sparks into the evening sky. Alara sobbed. Evelyn called out for her mother. Isabel forced herself upright, blood streaking her cheek. She crawled to the girls, pulling them close, murmuring soft words no one else could hear. She looked up, her eyes locking on Jake. Why would you?" Jake was already rising, brushing ash from his arms. His voice was low, calm. "I saw fire. And there were kids." He turned, clearly ready to walk back to his truck. "Wait," Isabel called, reaching after him. "Please. I don't know where to go." Jake hesitated. He looked at the woman, shaking, smoke-stained, holding her daughters like they were the only thing keeping her heart beating. He glanced down at the little girl who had run to him. Evelyn tugged at his hand. "Are you a firefighter, mister?" He knelt beside her, looking into those frightened, hopeful eyes. "No," he said softly, "just someone who once lost a child." He stood again. "My place is about 3 miles up that road. It's not much, but it's safe. You can stay there tonight." Isabel nodded, eyes shining with silent gratitude. And with that, they left the burning wreck behind, walking toward a place none of them yet realized might become home. The first thing Isabel noticed was the light. It poured through a thin cotton curtain, soft and golden, casting a quiet glow across the wooden floor and the patchwork quilt covering her. The room smelled faintly of cedar and sun-dried cotton. The walls were rough-hewn but clean. A single dresser, a rocking chair, a humming lamp. She was still in Jake's borrowed clothes from the night before, an oversized flannel shirt and worn jeans, but they were warm, clean, a quiet kindness she hadn't known she needed. Outside, soft laughter floated through the window. She walked barefoot to the doorway, peering out onto the porch. Evelyn and Alara crouched beside a pen of clucking chickens, giggling as they tossed crumbs of toast. Their shoes were off, their hair wild, and for the first time in months, they looked like children. Pulling the flannel tighter, Isabel stepped into the kitchen. On the counter by the fireplace was a steaming mug of tea and a folded note. "There's toast. I'm at the shop. Call if you need." She stood for a moment, scanning the space. It was tidy, but not pristine. A towel stained with motor oil hung by the sink. Muddy boots stood near the door. The faint scent of wood smoke lingered. It didn't speak of money or perfection, but of someone who'd chosen to keep living. She took a sip of tea. It tasted like quiet. Jake didn't ask questions. Not about the fire, not about the girls, not even about her. Instead, he fixed the creaking bathroom door that had startled her so badly she couldn't sleep. He added 2 stools in the workshop, with a crate of crayons and scrap paper. Each night, 3 oatmeal cookies appeared outside her door. No note, no explanation. It wasn't romance. It wasn't politeness. It was presence, steady and without pressure. For the first time in years, Isabel didn't feel watched while she mothered. She bathed the girls with lavender shampoo she found behind the towels. She warmed milk with homemade honey for Alara. She wiped Evelyn's muddy fingerprints from the fridge door and smiled while doing it. Each act felt like her body remembering how to breathe. One night, after the girls were asleep, Isabel stepped onto the porch. Jake sat near the railing, working quietly on a rusted engine part. His hands were black with grease. He didn't look up. She sat across from him. He reached over, slid a can of lemonade her way, already opened. They didn't speak. Then, softly, she said, "The moon's nice tonight." Jake nodded. "I haven't looked up in a while." That was it. No talk of pain or loss. Just a man and a woman sitting quietly beneath the stars. The next morning, Evelyn asked, "Is Jake a bad guy?" Isabel frowned. "Why would you say that, sweetheart?" "Because he doesn't smile like the dads on TV, but he makes me feel safer." Later, Alara handed Isabel a drawing, a tall man with broad shoulders standing under a red tin roof, shielding 3 smaller figures. It was raining in the picture, but all 4 were dry. Isabel held the paper for a long time, hands trembling. One afternoon, Jake stood in the doorway, watching Isabel braid the girl's hair in the sun. She was laughing softly. Not carefree, but lighter. He didn't interrupt. He just turned away and let the screen door shut behind him. But as he stepped back, something shifted in his expression. A small smile, barely there, rare and real. As if something in him was beginning to heal, too. There was no confession, no promises, no grand gesture, just life. Isabel hanging laundry by the garden, Jake mending the fence. The girls running barefoot through grass, their laughter echoing across the hills. And in the hush between moments, something unspoken began to grow. Not because anyone asked, but because someone stayed. The wrench slipped from Jake's hand and clattered onto the workshop floor. He wiped the sweat from his brow and glanced at the small TV mounted in the corner, where the weather played on low volume. A cold front, chance of rain. He reached for another tool, then froze. The anchor's voice shifted. A new headline scrolled across the screen. Prominent attorney Philip Shaw pleads for help locating his missing wife and daughters. Inside the farmhouse, Isabel stirred warm milk for the girls. The twins were in the living room, drawing and giggling softly. Then she heard the name, Philip Shaw. She went still. Slowly, she walked toward the open workshop door. Her eyes landed on the screen, and her blood turned cold. There he was, her husband, almost ex-husband, standing at a podium with the American flag behind him. His expression was solemn, rehearsed, his voice tight with practiced pain. "My wife, Isabel, and our daughters were last seen several weeks ago. We believe she may have been coerced by someone dangerous. I just want them home." Jake stepped into the doorway. "You okay?" Isabel didn't answer. She turned and rushed down the hall, locking herself in the bathroom. Her breath came fast, shallow. Her hands trembled. She slid down the wall, wrapping her arms around her knees. Outside, there was no knock, just a quiet clink. Jake had set down a glass of water, a folded towel. Then, his voice, low, gentle. "He found you?" She barely whispered. "He doesn't want to find me. He wants to erase me." That night, they didn't sleep. They met by the stables, where the air was cooler and the world felt still. Only the creak of wood and the sounds of horses moving in their stalls filled the space. Jake leaned against a post. A flashlight hung nearby, casting thin shadows. "I had a son," he said. "Adam." Isabel stayed quiet. She didn't need to speak. A car lost its brakes, hit him out front. Jake's jaw clenched. "I was home. I should have stopped it. After that, I left everything behind. Came here, shut the world out." He paused. "But when I saw your car burning, I didn't think. I ran." Isabel stepped closer. Slowly, she placed a hand on his shoulder. He didn't flinch. It was the first time she'd touched him without fear, without urgency, just trust. By morning, she was packing. She moved quickly, quietly, not wanting the girls to notice. But Evelyn had already crawled under the table. "Are we leaving again?" she whispered. Ilara clung to Jake's leg, tears streaking her cheeks, shaking her head. Jake walked in just as Isabel zipped the bag. His voice was calm, but there was something steady in it now. "Certain. They're after you because they're afraid of you, not because you're weak." Isabel looked up. Her hands trembled. "I can't risk you," she whispered. Jake didn't waver. "You already saved me." For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the wind outside. Isabel stood frozen, bag in hand, jaw clenched. Then she let go. She dropped the bag, pulled the tie from her hair, sunk to the kitchen floor and wrapped her arms around her daughters. Jake watched her. No speeches, no questions, just a woman sitting with her children, breathing deeply for the first time in weeks. He turned toward the front door, placed his hand on the knob, and turned the lock. A quiet click filled the room. He didn't say she was safe. He didn't have to. Evelyn's laughter rang across the field like wind chimes caught in a gentle breeze. She and Ilara crouched beside Jake near the garden bed, their small hands plunging eagerly into the soft earth. Dirt smudged their cheeks, and their shoes were already tossed aside, forgotten. Jake knelt beside them, sleeves rolled up, calloused hands guiding theirs. "Not too deep," he said gently. "Carrots need just enough room to breathe, not to disappear." He didn't raise his voice, didn't rush. When Ilara accidentally dumped half the seed packet in one spot, he only chuckled, brushed the dirt aside, and said, "Looks like someone wants a carrot jungle." From the doorway, Isabel watched. A steaming mug of coffee nestled in her palms, warming her fingertips. The sun filtered through the trees, casting long golden lines across the porch. For a long time, she simply stood there, quiet, absorbing the moment. Then, for the first time in years, she smiled, and didn't feel guilty for it. Later that afternoon, she searched for a fresh towel in the hallway cabinet and found a stack of books tucked behind the linens. Old, worn, and annotated. First Response for Children. Psychological Recovery for Veterans. Her fingers flipped through the pages. Notes in the margins, underlines, arrows. His handwriting was uneven but careful. Don't raise your voice when a child panics. Lower yourself to their eye level. Silence isn't coldness. It's a place where someone might feel safe again. Isabel closed the book and stood there for a moment, pressing her hand against her chest. No one had ever taught Jake how to care. He had taught himself, page by page, mistake by mistake. That evening, the farmhouse smelled like grilled meat and warm herbs. Jake was at the old stone grill on the patio, flipping steaks, a worn apron tied over his flannel. Evelyn and Alara sat on upturned buckets, peeling potatoes with intense focus and frequent giggles. Isabel set down a pitcher of lemonade on the wooden table, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. She cleared her throat. You know, when I was 10, I skipped school to watch fireworks from the country fair. Alara looked up wide-eyed. You skipped? I did. Got caught. Grounded for 2 weeks. Isabel laughed softly. But it was worth it. Jake turned slightly, smiling. A real one this time, broad and unguarded. Isabel caught her breath. He had a nice smile. She wondered why he used it so little. After dinner, they all sat on the porch. Alara curled in Isabel's lap, her breathing steady and deep. Evelyn leaned against Jake, eyes heavy with sleep. I want to stay here forever, Alara mumbled, half dreaming. Isabel kissed her forehead. Me too, she whispered. The girls were asleep by 8. Tucked into the room Isabel had made feel like home with a few books and freshly washed sheets. The night outside was still and cool. Jake sat on the front steps, a tool rag slung over his shoulder. Isabel joined him quietly, handing him a mug of cocoa. No questions, no explanations. They sat side by side, gazing at the stars stretching endlessly above. I don't know what I'm doing, Jake said after a long silence. But I know I'm not leaving. She looked at him, her voice low but certain. You don't have to get it right. You just have to be here. And that was enough. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, the security monitor in Jake's workshop flickered. One of the northern cameras, mounted to the fence line, picked up movement, a black SUV. It moved slowly past the edge of the property, lights off, engine low. Jake leaned forward, his jaw tightening. He watched the screen until the vehicle vanished from view. No one got out. No one approached. But it didn't need to. They were watching. He sat back, staring at the screen for another long minute before reaching over to shut it off. They're moving faster than I thought, he muttered. His voice was calm, but his fingers curled into a fist. The morning began like any other. Warm sun spilled into the farmhouse kitchen, where the scent of pancakes drifted through the air. Jake flipped another onto a plate while Isabel poured juice into 3 mismatched glasses. Evelyn and Alara sat at the table, giggling over syrup patterns they made with their forks. It was so quiet, so soft, that it felt unreal. The chickens clucked lazily outside. A breeze nudged the curtains. For a brief moment, Jake allowed himself to believe they had outrun it all. He turned to say something to Isabel, something small, maybe about how Alara's braid was coming loose, but the floor trembled beneath his boots. It started subtle, like distant thunder, but then the dishes rattled. The sound grew louder, deeper. Isabel froze, one hand hovering above a napkin. Her breath caught. Jake stepped onto the porch, squinting at the sky. 3 black helicopters were descending fast, cutting through the morning like blades through silk. Dust spiraled up from the fields in violent gusts, slamming into the sides of the house. The wind howled through the screen door as Isabel scooped her daughters into her arms. No, she whispered. No, 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 he found us. Evelyn shrieked as the window shook. Alara buried her face in Isabel's neck, her tiny hands covering her ears. Jake turned to them, jaw clenched. Get back. Stay low. But it was too late. The first chopper touched down in the clearing beyond the barn, kicking up dirt and hay. 2 more followed in quick formation. As the engines whined down, the side door of the lead helicopter opened with military precision. Philip Shaw stepped out like he owned the land. He wore an immaculate navy coat, dark sunglasses, and that calm, sinister smirk that made Isabel's stomach lurch. Around him, 6 men in black suits emerged, earpieces flashing, tasers visible at their hips. "Belle," Philip called, smooth as ice. "Let's go, now. Your father's about to lose his mind." Jake moved between them, standing square, feet planted. "She's not going anywhere." Philip's face didn't change. He simply nodded once. 2 of the men advanced. Isabel backed into the stable wall, clutching her daughters. Evelyn screamed. Ilara sobbed. Jake swung at the first man, landing a solid blow, but another struck from the side, tackling him to the ground. He fought like a bear, teeth gritted, but they overwhelmed him. One of the guards ripped Isabel from her girls. She thrashed, kicked, scratched, but they were stronger. Evelyn latched onto Jake's leg, sobbing, "Don't let them take us." Ilara was yanked into the arms of a guard, her bear falling from her grasp. "Jake." Isabel's scream was ragged, raw. "Don't let them take the girls." Her fingernails scraped the wooden door of the stable as they dragged her away. Jake tried to get up, but a boot pressed into his spine. He reached, desperate, fingertips grazing the dirt where Evelyn's bracelet lay, broken. Philip watched it all like theater, hands in his pockets, unmoved. The helicopters fired up again, blades spinning violently. Jake was released just as the last door slammed shut. He stumbled to his feet, face bloodied, chest heaving. Inside the chopper, Isabel pressed her hands to the glass, tears streaking down her face. "Jake!" she cried. "Jake!" The girls cried out too, their voices thin against the roar of the engines. "Uncle Jake, please!" Jake stood in the field, every muscle trembling. He didn't shout, didn't chase, just stood there as dust coated his skin and the sky swallowed the machines. The wind settled. The fields quieted. They were gone. He looked down at the bracelet in his palm. A single pink bead fell into the dirt. Jake turned toward the house. The table still held pancakes going cold. A chair was knocked over. Isabel's scarf had been torn and left behind, caught in the fence wire like a flag of surrender. He walked into the workshop, closed the door behind him, and stood in the silence. Then, finally, he spoke. "I'll get them back." The black gates of the Hartford mansion slammed shut behind them. Isabel stood on the marble driveway, twins wrapped tight against her chest. Guards in dark suits lined the entrance. Cameras glinted behind polished lenses. Her phone had been confiscated. Her passport. Anything the outside world could track. She was allowed to see her daughters only after dinner, under the watchful eyes of the staff. The hours in between were hers alone with silence. That silence became a cage. Her father arrived as the sun dipped low, stern and cold. "You will not disgrace this family," he said, voice low. "Forget your escape, forget the lies." Isabel lifted her chin. The bruise on her cheek throbbed, but her eyes stayed steady. The dinner hall was quiet. The long oak table stretched. Between her daughter's high chairs and her father's carved seat. She picked at the food. She did not speak. Meanwhile, miles away, in the empty fields and dusty workshop of the Wyatt farm, Jake stood alone. The small guest bed, the one where the girls had slept only the night before, sat untouched. The pillow was stained with fresh grass, the sheets stiff from the night air. On the kitchen table, a cup of tea sat half empty, lipstick blurred around the rim. He cradled a single hair ribbon in his rough, calloused hands, the one Ilara had dropped while running to hide when the men came. He closed his eyes, heart pounding. Once more, he had failed to protect. But this time the failure did not break him. Jake folded the ribbon and shoved it into his pocket. He stood, wiped his hands on a greasy rag, and turned back to the tools waiting on the bench. Back at the mansion, Isabel was making a call in secret. Late one night, the butler had briefly left the room, The guard at the door had dozed. In that window, she reached for the one number she still trusted, a lawyer's. Earliest papers filed. The charge sheet was thick. Domestic abuse, coercion, emotional manipulation, and, most damning, attempted vehicular homicide. The next morning, Philip paced the marble floors like a caged lion. He launched a temper tantrum when the papers arrived. A wine glass smashed against the wall, shards glittering like cold promises on the hardwood. His fury echoed through halls once built to show control. Isabel did not back down. She stood tall, calm but firm. "I am not your possession," she said. "My children are not property." His rage simmered, but could not touch the steel in her eyes. Her lawyer had already secured the battered SUV from evidence storage. The blackened shell, charred beyond recognition, had hidden something still intact: the dash cam's hard drive. They plugged it in. The grainy footage played. The mechanic bent over the brake lines. A muffled click, a brief hesitation, and then the car surged forward on the night they fled. Isabel pressed her trembling hand over her mouth. Ilara's small hands gripped the sofa cushion. Evelyn stared wide-eyed. "He was ready to kill us," Isabel whispered. She signed the final sheets. The judge's gavel fell hours later, granting full custody and barring Philip from approaching or contacting the twins. News vans camped on the curb outside the mansion. Photographers snapped, flashing lights off the dark windows. The name Isabel Hartford trended across morning news. Later, Jake sat in his workshop, the radio playing low in the corner. The anchors discussed the case, the allegations against Philip, the heroic rescue on the highway, the allegations of attempted murder. His hand trembled on the wrench. For a long moment, he stared at the wall, at the tools hanging quietly. Then his gaze softened. He set the wrench down. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to hope. He whispered into the silence, "She's not running anymore." The courtroom was silent as the judge read the order. Philip Shaw was barred from contacting Isabel or the children indefinitely. Full custody of Evelyn and Ilara was granted to her, without contest. Philip had stopped showing up by the end. His empire was cracking. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shouting questions Isabel didn't answer. Her lawyer led her through the doors, shielding the twins. She didn't look back, not at the cameras, not at the marble steps, not at the city. That night, she stood in the hallway of her father's estate. He waited in his study, brandy in hand, expecting her return. She didn't knock. She didn't enter. She packed only what mattered: clothes for the girls, their drawings, a soft, half-burnt teddy bear, and one small folded note Jake had left beside a cup of tea weeks ago. She held the twins' hands and whispered, "We're not going back there. Not to grandfather's. Not to anyone's mansion." Ilara looked up, sleepy-eyed. "Where are we going, Mommy?" Isabel knelt, her voice trembling. "Somewhere I felt safe. Somewhere you two laughed." The road stretched long and dark under the stars. Isabel drove through the night, her hands gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. Evelyn and Ilara curled in the back seat, fast asleep, hugging the pillows Jake had once given them. The headlights cut through fog as miles passed under their tires. Isabel whispered to herself, "What if he doesn't want us back?" The wooden sign for Wyatt Farm appeared just before dawn. The porch light was still on. The moment she pulled into the gravel drive, her breath caught. Jake was by the fence line, hammer in hand, halfway through rebuilding the posts they had painted together with the girls. He froze. The sound of the car door opening made him turn. His eyes landed on her, then on the girls. He dropped the hammer. The twins were the first to move. Evelyn burst from the car, yelling, "Jake!" Ilara followed, stumbling over her untied shoes, hair messy from sleep, arms outstretched. They reached him, colliding into his legs, clutching tight. He knelt, one arm around each of them, burying his face into their small shoulders. Isabel stood at the car, unmoving. Her hands trembled. She didn't know what to do with them, whether to hold herself or hide. Jake looked up at her. She tried to speak but couldn't. He rose slowly, walking toward her, still holding the girl's hands. When he reached her, he didn't ask questions, he didn't demand explanations. He simply placed his rough hand on her shoulder and said softly, "You did what most people wouldn't have dared." She nodded, eyes glistening. There was nothing else to say. Not in that moment. The silence that wrapped around them was not awkward. It was familiar. It was family. Jake turned and opened the front door. "Go on," he said, nodding toward the girls. They ran inside, barefoot, like they had never left. Their laughter returned to the house before their footsteps did. Isabel stood at the threshold, her hand grazing the wood. She saw it then, on the table. A jar of wildflowers, faded but kept fresh with care. The same ones she and the girls had picked on their first walk around the field. The same flowers Jake hadn't thrown away. She stepped inside, voice barely audible. "We're home." Mornings on the farm had changed. Evelyn, in her small boots, scattered chicken feed like it was her mission. Ilara sat by the porch, tongue out in focus, sketching sunflowers in a notebook Jake had given her. It still smelled faintly of engine oil. Isabel clipped damp laundry onto the line, her hands unhurried. The breeze played with her hair. The scent of cotton and sun lingered. For the first time in years, she wasn't watching her back. Across the field, Jake knelt beside an old truck, tightening bolts. Sweat darkened his shirt collar, grease smudged his arms. The barn door stayed open, always open, a silent invitation. "I'm here." By late fall, they had a rhythm, quiet, real, comforting. Behind the house, Isabel hung a wooden sign. "Belle's Shed, handmade and honest." Inside, shelves held her soaps, candles, and woven baskets. She sold them at the weekend market, where neighbors began calling her the woman who made pain smell like lavender. One morning, near the garden, Isabel overheard Ilara whisper, "Mommy's like a superhero." Evelyn nodded. "The kind who doesn't need a cape." That night, the four of them sat around the fire pit. Jake taught the twins to roast marshmallows. Isabel leaned back, blanket over her lap, watching the flames dance across his face. Ilara's marshmallow burst into flame, and she blew on it like a candle. Jake laughed. Isabel didn't laugh, but her chest warmed, like something inside her was quietly mending. There were no declarations, no labels, just the nights, long, unhurried talks beneath the stars. He spoke of old engines and dry thunder in Afghanistan. She shared stories about sneaking novels past her father, who thought fiction was frivolous. They didn't apologize for their scars. They showed up. One afternoon, Isabel tried lifting a crate into the shed. It slipped. Jake caught it before it hit the ground. Their hands met, steady, brief. Neither pulled away. Jake's voice was soft, but sure. "I don't know what the future holds, but if you stayed, I'd be grateful." Isabel didn't answer with words. She just let her hand linger. That evening, the world was golden. They sat on the porch. Evelyn nestled against Jake, holding his flannel sleeve like a blanket. Ilara, half asleep, lay in Isabel's lap. The wind whispered through the trees. The old house didn't creak, not like houses do when they're empty. Isabel leaned her head on the post, eyes soft. Jake looked over. She met his gaze. In that look, no promises, no vows, but everything they needed to say. They were rebuilding. A life, a family, quietly, steadily, and in that hush of twilight, with two healing hearts and two tiny ones finally safe, the world felt like it had finally settled into place. They didn't call it love. They didn't have to. Sometimes happiness wasn't loud. It looked like a weathered porch, two sleeping girls, and the simple miracle of not walking away. Thank you for following Isabel and Jake's quiet,